I thought I was freezing, until I saw someone who looked like the cold had already claimed him. I've always believed winter has a way of exposing who we are. When the weather strips away comfort, when the wind turns each breath into pain and your fingers stop feeling like yours. That's when the truth comes out. It doesn't matter who you pretend to be in the sunshine. When it's below zero and your bones ache, your true self surfaces. That night, the city was wrapped in silence. The snow had been falling for hours, soft but relentless, and the roads had long given up trying to fight it. Most of the shops were closed. The sidewalks were a patchwork of slush and salt, and the sky looked like it was holding its breath. I had just finished a 15-hour shift in a steel freight warehouse on the river's edge. My hands were cracked from the cold, my shoulders sore from lifting crates all day. And worst of all, my jacket, the one I'd been wearing for 3 winters straight, had finally betrayed me. The zipper was broken, the lining torn, and the wind found every weak spot like it was mocking me. I was walking home, head down, one step at a time. My gloves were 2 mismatched pieces I'd found in the break room months ago. My scarf was missing. I'd lost it on the subway 3 days prior. I didn't even have headphones to drown out the wind. I just walked, the only sound in my ears the crunch of my own boots pressing down half-melted snow. I remember turning the corner onto 8th Avenue, and for a split second, I thought I saw a pile of discarded blankets near the bus stop. Nothing out of the ordinary. The city is full of half-seen shapes in the dark. But something made me look again. It wasn't blankets. It was a man. An old man. Alone. Slumped against the glass wall of a closed flower shop. He was motionless, except for the tremors running through his body, his chest rising and falling in short, jerky movements. He wasn't just cold. He was dying from it. He wore a thin button-down shirt, the kind you'd wear in spring, and his pants were so torn at the knee I could see patches of bruised skin beneath. His shoes were ruined. One heel was gone completely. His hands were bare, knuckles red and raw, the skin around them split open from exposure. His shoulders shook with a rhythm that frightened me. Not the kind of shivering that helps generate heat, but the kind that comes right before the body gives up. And then he looked at me. I can't describe his eyes exactly. Not because I don't remember. I do. But because there was something in them that language doesn't capture. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even the numbness I'd seen on other faces in similar positions. It was knowing. He looked at me like he knew me. Not my name or my story, but something deeper. Like he recognized a part of himself inside me. There was no movement, no sound. Just that gaze, reaching out to me in a silence that felt louder than traffic ever could. I stopped walking. Everything in me said, keep going. I had no food at home, no backup coat, barely enough heat in my apartment to survive the night. I had given all I had at work that day, and had nothing left to give. But somehow, standing there under a street lamp that flickered in and out like a dying heartbeat, I couldn't take another step. I looked at him. He looked at me. And in that frozen moment, everything shifted. I walked over slowly, my own teeth chattering as I knelt beside him. The cold hit harder when I stopped moving, like knives against my spine. He didn't move, just followed me with his eyes. "You'll freeze to death out here," I said, my voice hoarse from the dry air. He didn't answer, but I could see the tension in his jaw ease just slightly, like my words had landed somewhere soft. I hesitated for a moment, then did the only thing that felt human. I pulled off my jacket, the one thing between me and hypothermia, and held it out to him. He stared at it. Then he looked back at me. And for a moment, I thought he might refuse it. I thought maybe he was too proud, or too used to being overlooked, or too far gone to even respond. But then, slowly, he reached out his hands. His fingers barely worked. It took effort. His hands trembled violently as he gripped the fabric. He slid one arm in, then the other, with my help. The jacket hung loose around his thin frame, but it was warmth. Borrowed warmth, but real. He closed his eyes and exhaled softly. Then, without opening them, he said, "You don't know what you've just done." I opened my mouth, but no words came. "This," he continued, now looking at me with a strange light in his eyes, "this will come back to you." In ways you can't imagine, I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but not from the cold. It was in the way he said it, not like a hope, but like a promise. Like he wasn't guessing, like he knew. I didn't know how to respond. I gave him a quiet nod, stood up, and walked away. The cold hit instantly. My teeth clattered against each other. My arms folded tight across my chest, trying to keep in what little warmth I had left. But I didn't feel regret. Not once. If anything, I felt strange. Like I'd done something irreversible. Like I'd tipped the first domino in a line I couldn't see yet. When I got home, my body was shaking too hard to unlock the door at first. I had to sit down on the stoop, let my fingers thaw enough to hold the keys. Inside, the apartment was dark and silent. My breath was visible even indoors. The space heater sputtered to life with its usual hum. I wrapped myself in 2 thin blankets, boiled water for tea, and sat on the mattress I called a bed. And I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not just his condition, not just the jacket, but his face, his voice, the certainty in his tone. "This will come back to you." I had never believed in fate. I believed in survival. In work in doing what you had to do. But something about that moment wouldn't let go of me. I replayed it again and again in my mind. His hands, his voice, that look. I fell asleep shivering, wondering if I'd just helped a dying man live, or a living man wake up. That night, as my body finally gave in to sleep, his voice followed me into my dreams. Soft, but certain. "This will come back to you." And I had no idea how right he was. Most faces blur with time. His got clearer. I've passed thousands of people in this city. At crosswalks, in train stations, inside coffee shops, by vending machines, under neon signs and flickering streetlights. Most faces fade the moment they disappear from view, like breath on cold glass, present for a moment, then gone. But his face didn't fade. It stayed, and the longer he was gone, the more vivid he became. The creases in his forehead, the wet clumps of white hair matted to his temple, the way his lips trembled but his eyes didn't. All of it was burned into me. I remembered his knuckles, how they were raw and red. I remembered the sound of his voice when he said, "This will come back to you." I remembered how, even as he shivered, he spoke like a man with absolute certainty. It was the next day when I retraced my steps, thinking maybe he'd still be there, still huddled beneath that broken street lamp outside the flower shop. But he wasn't. Not even a trace. No footprints, no blanket, no food wrapper, not even a shadow. I stood there longer than I should have, my breath clouding in the air, scanning every corner like he might appear from the sidewalk cracks. But he didn't. I went back the day after that. Still nothing. For the next 5 days, I passed that corner like it was part of my routine, pretending I was just walking home the usual way, but always slowing down near the flower shop window. Still no sign. It was like he had never been there at all. I didn't talk to anyone about it at first. It felt too strange, too personal. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I mentioned it to a coworker during lunch, just casually, like I was making small talk. There was this guy, a homeless man. I gave him my jacket. Haven't seen him since. He laughed. "What, you think he was an angel or something?" I didn't. But I did not think it either. A few others chimed in. Some praised the kindness, some rolled their eyes. One person said I was probably scammed. Another asked if I was expecting a reward. I didn't like any of their responses. It made me feel like maybe I was crazy for even thinking about him still. But I couldn't stop. It wasn't just the act of giving away my jacket. It was him, his stillness, his calm, his certainty. The way he looked at me like he already knew something I didn't. The way he accepted the jacket not with desperation, but with grace. That's what I couldn't forget. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Homeless men and women on sidewalks. People digging through bins, curled under stairwells, clutching thin blankets in 20-degree weather. I saw them now. Really saw them. I didn't know how I had ignored them before. The city didn't change. I did. I felt like I had been walking through a fog for years, and suddenly, someone had wiped the glass clean. Now I couldn't unsee what had always been there. A kind of quiet suffering that the city had learned to tune out. But it wasn't just guilt. It was curiosity. Who was he? I kept turning over his final words. This will come back to you. It didn't sound like wishful thinking. It sounded like a prophecy. I started looking for him everywhere, not just at the corner where we met, but at bus stations, shelter lines, near warming centers, food distribution tents. I even checked online boards that offered support for the homeless, just in case someone had posted a photo or name. Nothing. At night, I replayed that moment like a scene in a film. I saw myself kneeling beside him, pulling off my jacket. I saw the way he looked at it before reaching out. I remembered how he spoke, not like a man asking for help, but like a man giving it. I didn't know what I was looking for anymore. Closure, answers, validation. I just knew something about that night had stuck to me like frost on skin. I couldn't shake it off. Then, one evening, I was riding the subway. I had missed my usual train, so I was on a later, emptier one. I sat near the middle of the car, scrolling through my phone, half asleep. Across from me, a group of people were arguing about interest rates and rent increases. One of those loud financial debates people have when they're trying to sound smarter than they are. One of them mentioned Metropolis Bank. I looked up briefly. The name rang a bell. They were the biggest banking entity in the city, owning everything from real estate portfolios to school debt portfolios. I didn't bank there. I didn't trust giants. As the train rolled into the next station, I looked up at one of the digital billboards above the platform. A new ad had just popped on screen. The Metropolis Bank logo appeared. And then, a face. I blinked hard. It couldn't be. The man in the photo was dressed in a navy blue three-piece suit, with perfectly combed hair and a clean-shaven jaw. His expression was confident, professional, and refined. But the eyes were the same. I froze. The ad read, Henry Ashcroft, Chairman and CEO, Metropolis Bank, Rebuilding Trust, Rebuilding the City. I stared up at the billboard, heart racing. It was the same man. The man I gave my jacket to. The man who had been sitting on the street in freezing temperatures. The man who had looked at me like he saw something beyond the moment. But this version of him, this Henry, was untouchable, powerful, controlled, draped in money and responsibility. He wasn't just somebody. He was the somebody. One of the most powerful financial figures in the city. My mouth went dry. I turned back toward the subway window, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Had I imagined everything? Had I given a jacket to a billionaire pretending to be homeless? Why would someone like him ever end up on the street? Then I remembered what he said. This will come back to you. I realized maybe it wasn't just kindness. Maybe it was a test. Maybe I had been the one evaluated, not the other way around. And just when I convinced myself I must have been mistaken, the next morning, I saw his face again. This time, not on a billboard, but walking past me in the flesh. I was just trying to move on, to tell myself that night was over and done with. But some faces don't fade, and some truths don't stay hidden forever. His face didn't return in the streetlight. It returned in 10-foot letters above the skyline. It was supposed to be an ordinary Monday. I had woken up late, spilled coffee on my shirt, and was rushing to catch the downtown train. My gloves were missing again, and I cursed the cold under my breath. I remember thinking how the sky looked too clean, too bright for a winter morning, like the city was hiding something behind all that light. I exited the subway at Lincoln Square, near the business district, a place I rarely visited. I had a job interview that day. Nothing fancy, just another low-level warehouse gig. But I needed it. Badly. As I hurried through the plaza, something in my peripheral vision stopped me. It wasn't the traffic or a voice. It was a massive billboard looming over the center of the city like a god watching from above. I looked up, and the world stopped moving. There he was, that same face, that same gaze. Only now, he wasn't shivering on a sidewalk or buried under my jacket. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, and deep blue tie. Clean-shaven, confident, collected. The billboard read, Henry Ashcroft, Chairman and CEO, Metropolis Bank. Rebuilding cities, reshaping futures. My heart thudded in my chest. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just similar. It wasn't a look-alike. It was him. The man I'd helped. The man I'd given my only jacket to. The man who had whispered, "This will come back to you." For a few seconds I just stood there in the middle of the plaza, ignoring the people brushing past me. It felt like the entire world had turned down its volume. All I could hear was my heartbeat in my ears and the wind pushing the snow sideways. My first thought was, had I been tricked? Had he faked it? Was this some kind of elaborate social experiment? Or worse, had I given charity to a man who didn't need it? But I remembered his voice. It hadn't been performative. He wasn't acting. When he looked at me that night, he didn't see a camera. He saw me. I pulled out my phone and searched his name, Henry Ashcroft. A wall of articles, photos, and interviews came up instantly. They painted the picture of a powerful, reclusive billionaire, an empire builder, a financial tactician, someone with influence in every corner of the city, housing, education, hospitals, even transit. And yet, almost nothing personal. No public appearances in months. No interviews where he mentioned his childhood or where he came from. Most of the headlines used words like strategic, private, ruthless. One article said he was worth over $19 billion. Billion. My hands trembled as I scrolled. I found one tiny paragraph in an old profile piece that stood out. Sources say Ashcroft vanishes every December, declining press, public events, and even board meetings. No official explanation has ever been given. Some speculate it's for health reasons. Others believe it's something far stranger. My stomach flipped. December. I looked back at the billboard. What kind of billionaire disappears for a month every winter? I dug deeper. I found 3 stories, buried in online forums, unverified, but still striking. One claimed a janitor once helped a man in rags in a bank lobby, only to be promoted weeks later to supervisor. Another said a bus driver once gave a free ride to an old man who couldn't pay. A year later, that same driver received an anonymous grant that helped pay off his mortgage. And a third story. A food vendor claimed he gave a bowl of soup to a silent man one snowy night, only to later learn he'd signed a partnership deal with a corporate angel investor. All the stories had one thing in common. A mysterious old man, always appearing in winter, always gone without a trace, always giving nothing but a look and taking nothing but kindness. Could it really be him? I stared at the billboard for what felt like hours. The snow was soaking into my collar, my toes numb inside my boots, but I couldn't leave. The man on that billboard had a name now, a title, a net worth. But the man I remembered didn't need any of that, because he already had something more powerful. He saw people, and he remembered. And suddenly, I remembered what he said. The words came back as clearly as if he were whispering them in my ear again. This will come back to you. In ways you can't imagine, my breath caught. Had this already started? Was this it? I stepped back from the crowd and sat on a frozen bench nearby, staring up at the billboard, while buses rumbled by and city life marched forward like I wasn't having the most confusing moment of my life. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Not yet. Not until I understood it myself. But from that moment on, I couldn't think of anything else. I walked away from the plaza that day, feeling like I was carrying something fragile and invisible. Something that didn't belong to me, but had been entrusted to me for a reason. I couldn't explain it, but I knew one thing for sure. That night on the street wasn't random. It was intentional, calculated, maybe even planned. I wasn't just someone who gave away a jacket. I was someone he chose. I didn't know what to do with that knowledge. But the city did, because just 1 week later, I got something in the mail, no return address, no explanation, that told me. He hadn't forgotten, not even for a second. Some letters are bills, some are junk, some are filled with promises from people who owe you nothing. But this one, it wasn't any of those. It didn't come with stamps or a sender. Just my name. That was enough to make me stop, breathing. It was a Wednesday night. I remember because I'd just come back from a job interview that felt like a waste of a clean shirt. The manager barely looked at my resume. His smile was tight, rehearsed. I left that building already knowing I wouldn't get a call back. The apartment hallway smelled like old paint and burnt rice. I turned the key and pushed the door open with my shoulder, too tired to even kick off my boots. That's when I noticed it. A black envelope. Sleek. Tucked under my door like it had been hand-placed just moments ago. No stamp. No company seal. Just my full name. Clean, centered, and written in silver ink. For a moment I thought it was a mistake. Or a prank. I looked around the hallway. No sounds. No footsteps. Just the usual creaks of old plumbing and the buzz of the flickering hallway light. I bent down, picked it up, and turned it over. Nothing on the back. My pulse quickened. I stepped inside, locked the door, and tore the flap gently. Inside was a single piece of thick, high-quality paper, black with silver writing, just like the envelope. It read, Metropolis Bank Winter Gala, Private Invitation. You are formally invited to attend an exclusive gathering at the Ashcroft Ballroom. Date, Saturday, 7 p.m. Dress code, formal, no RSVP required. Your attendance is expected. I blinked, reread it, then read it again. No name, no contact, no reason. It felt like holding a secret too powerful for my hands. Metropolis Bank, his company, the man from the street, the billboard, the one who had disappeared like smoke and then reappeared in headlines and executive summaries. My throat tightened. I walked to the window, stared out at the empty street below, wondering if someone was watching me. If he was watching me. This couldn't be random. This wasn't spam or coincidence. I held the envelope up to the light, searching for invisible ink, a code, something that would explain why me. There was nothing. Just silence and questions. My first instinct. Don't go. What if it was a trap? Or worse, what if it wasn't? What if this really was what it looked like? A door, creaking open into a world I didn't belong in. I sat on my couch for hours, turning the invitation over and over, checking the details, Googling the venue. The Ashcroft Ballroom was private property. It wasn't even listed as a rentable space. Most people didn't know it existed. It belonged to the upper echelon, a place where power traded secrets in champagne flutes. I didn't have a tuxedo. I didn't even have proper shoes. But part of me whispered, "This is the return." The man had said it, clear as day. This will come back to you. Was this it? I didn't sleep that night. My body was exhausted, but my brain sprinted circles around the same question. What does he want from me? By morning, I made up my mind. I scraped together what little cash I had left, skipped groceries, and took a train to the edge of town where second-hand formal stores lined the street. I found a charcoal gray suit that almost fit, a white shirt, slightly yellowed at the collar, a black tie with a frayed edge, shoes that had clearly seen more weddings than I ever would. But together, it worked. I got home, cleaned everything twice, ironed the shirt by laying it under my mattress. I shaved. I trimmed my nails. I stared at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. I practiced standing still, holding eye contact, smiling without showing too many teeth. My reflection looked like someone trying to pretend they belonged in a room they'd never enter again. I arrived early. The building was more intimidating than I imagined. A modern fortress of glass and gold, tucked behind gates and lined with luxury cars that cost more than the combined rent of every unit in my apartment building. At the front, a doorman nodded at me before I even spoke. "Right this way, sir." He didn't check my name, didn't ask for an ID. I followed him through a hallway that smelled like wealth, not perfume or air freshener, but power. We entered the ballroom. My breath caught in my chest. The ceiling was a galaxy of crystal chandeliers. Every wall shimmered with marble and polished brass. Waiters floated past with silver trays. A string quartet played near a sculpture that cost more than my education. Everyone was dressed like royalty. Silk gowns, tailored suits, cufflinks that sparkled like stars. And there I stood, second-hand suit, borrowed courage, holding a paper invitation in my damp hand. No one looked at me, not in disgust, not in curiosity. It was worse. They didn't see me at all. I floated through the room like a ghost, smiling when someone brushed past, nodding politely when I locked eyes with strangers who quickly looked away. I kept scanning the crowd for him. I didn't know if he'd appear in a grand entrance or just be standing in a corner with a drink in his hand. But he wasn't there. I waited. An hour passed, then another. I walked to the bar, ordered water because it was free, and leaned against a column like I belonged there. Then something happened. A woman in a green velvet dress walked up to me. Her voice was soft, professional. "Mr. Ashcroft is ready for you now." She turned without waiting for a response, and I followed. Down a hallway, through a private door, into a room that looked like an entirely different universe. Quiet, warm, lit by a fire and a single floor lamp. And there he was, the man I had once seen, frozen, shaking, forgotten, standing tall, calm, wearing the same kind of suit I saw on the billboard. But now he was smiling, not just with his lips, but with something older and deeper in his eyes. "You came," he said, like he knew I would. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. "Have a seat," he offered. "We have much to talk about." And just like that, the past collided with the present. I thought I was walking into that ballroom to return a jacket. But I walked out having traded it for a key to a world I never knew existed. The last time I saw him, he was hidden beneath the weight of the city's indifference, wrapped in the only jacket I owned. Now, he stood center stage, in a room built for power, elegance radiating from him like heat, and every person in that space looked at him as if he were more than just a man. But only I had seen who he really was. The transformation was not just visual, it was visceral. The moment Henry Ashcroft entered the ballroom, the air changed. There was no dramatic music or sudden hush orchestrated by some stage director. The shift was organic, natural, as though the building itself recognized him and paused to acknowledge his presence. He didn't walk fast. He didn't speak. But the moment he crossed the room's threshold, it felt like the spotlight had adjusted itself to follow him. And without anyone asking, the crowd began to clap. It wasn't the hollow applause you hear at company award nights or forced celebrations. It was deeper, reverent, like a cathedral full of believers quietly praising a man who had shaped the lives of everyone in that room, whether they admitted it or not. I stood near the back wall, my second-hand suit now feeling embarrassingly out of place. I tried to shrink into the shadows, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. This was the same man I had helped just weeks before, trembling under a streetlight, his hands purple from cold, his body nearly skeletal from exposure. But now he was the picture of precision and power. His tuxedo, sleek and immaculately pressed, fit him like it was tailored in a vault. His shoes clicked softly on the marble floor, each step deliberate, quiet, and yet deafening in presence. He greeted people one by one, offering warm handshakes, modest nods, and brief conversations that left his audience smiling like children. And then, suddenly, without a word or gesture, he looked directly at me. It lasted only 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds rooted me to the floor. His eyes carried something unspoken, not surprise, not pity, but recognition. Quiet, personal recognition. My heart began to hammer so hard I feared someone might hear it. I wasn't ready for this. Not really. 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. Was he testing me again? Had I misremembered that night? What did he want? He's the CEO, a voice whispered beside me, low, reverent, and almost afraid to speak too loudly. Henry Ashcroft. He owns everything I wanted to say. No, he doesn't. Because in that moment, I realized something. These people worshipped the image of him, the controlled version, the suit, the bank accounts, the reputation. But I had met the real man. Fragile, human, stripped of identity, with nothing to offer but a glance and a shiver. He turned away from me, smiling at someone I couldn't see behind the crowd, and I had to remind myself to breathe. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Maybe I'd given a jacket to someone else, and my brain, hungry for meaning, had stitched these events into a fantasy. But before that thought could settle, I noticed a member of the event staff walking directly toward me. Her black uniform was spotless, her posture straight, her eyes trained only on me. "Mr. Ashcroft would like a word with you," she said. No question, no room for refusal. My legs moved without permission. The music faded into background noise. My pulse became the loudest thing in the world. I followed her across the ballroom floor, acutely aware of how many eyes now tracked me. Who was I to warrant his attention? What did they think I had done? She guided me through a discreet side entrance, tucked between 2 marble columns. Beyond the door was a quiet corridor lit with low golden sconces. Thick carpeting muted our steps. We passed framed oil paintings, silent doors, and what looked like a private library. Finally, she stopped and opened a tall wooden door. "He's inside," she said gently. Then she stepped away. I stepped in. The room was a contrast to the glitter of the ballroom, dimly lit, quiet, and warm. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The walls were lined with books and old photographs. A small table held a decanter and 2 glasses, and near the far window, gazing out at the glittering skyline, stood Henry Ashcroft. When he turned to face me, there was no grandeur, no tension, just quiet acknowledgement. "You came," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "Thank you." "I didn't know if I should," I replied, my throat dry. He smiled, the kind that carried weight, not for the sake of charm, but because he meant it. Neither did I. But here we are. He motioned to the chair across from his. I sat. He sat. For a moment, there was only the sound of the fire and the steady rhythm of a city far below us. "You're wondering why you're here," he said, folding his hands. "More like how," I replied. "And what now?" He nodded slowly, as if expecting the questions. "There are parts of this city that never get seen, and not just the streets. I'm talking about the spaces between people, the silence between elevator dings and subway stops, the lives lived between corner offices and cardboard shelters. You met me in one of those places, and you didn't look away." His voice didn't waver. It was steady, precise, the voice of a man who'd spoken in boardrooms, courthouses, and perhaps even funerals. But it wasn't cold. It carried warmth, restraint, and something I never expected: humility. "You think you gave me a jacket," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "But what you gave me was something far more rare, a reason to believe people still choose kindness when no one is watching." I sat there, stunned. No speech, no reply. Most people walk past. Some stop and ask, but very few act, he continued. You acted. Without expectation. Without calculation. That matters. He stood and walked to the side table. He picked up a cloth bundle and placed it in front of me. I opened it. Inside was my jacket, the one I thought I'd never see again, but now it had been cleaned, repaired, and carefully restitched. Inside, just above the inner pocket, was a new tag embroidered with a simple phrase. You saw what others didn't. I looked up at him, trying to find words. That jacket saved more than me, he said quietly. It reminded me of who I was, and who I still wanted to be. And before I could thank him, he offered me something I never imagined, a chance to step into a world I didn't belong to. Yet. 6. The truth beneath the suit. Word count, 1,460. He wasn't performing for pity or admiration. He wasn't searching for heroes in the dark. He was searching for himself. And I realized the most powerful man in the city had been wandering the cold streets, not to judge others, but to remind himself of who he used to be. I sat across from Henry Ashcroft in that quiet room, the fire behind him casting slow-moving shadows along the walls, and it hit me. Everything I thought I understood about him was just the surface, the suit, the power, the money, the silence. None of it explained the man before me. You're wondering why someone like me would ever be on the street, he said. His voice was calm, not defensive, like he'd answered this question 1,000 times in his head, and still didn't have a neat response. I nodded. Honestly, yes. It doesn't make sense. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting near the firelight, the other gripping the armrest like he was holding on to something buried in time. I do it every year, he said. I disappear from the media, the events, the headlines. My team assumes I'm off-grid at some estate or island, and I let them believe it. But the truth is, I walk. No car, no driver, no cards, just enough cash for one coffee a day. The rest I figure out, like I used to. I didn't interrupt. The words were unfolding from him with the weight of memory. I was born just 20 blocks from here, he said. My mother worked nights cleaning government buildings. My father left before I could say his name. Most days we didn't have hot water. Some days we didn't have food. He smiled faintly, not with joy, but nostalgia that came with scars. I remember how the world treated us. People looked through me like I was fog on a window, there but inconvenient. I grew up learning how to be invisible, how to blend in, ask for nothing, keep moving. You either grow resentful, or you build armor. I did both. I listened, unable to look away. Every word he said felt personal, not because of who he was, but because of who he had been. When the money came, he continued, I promised myself I'd never be cold again, not physically, not financially, not emotionally. I thought money would thaw everything. He paused. The fire popped. It didn't, he whispered. If anything, it made the cold deeper, because now I was warm while others froze. I became everything I hated growing up. I forgot what real need looked like. I forgot how to see people. He leaned forward now, elbows on knees, eyes meeting mine with unnerving clarity. So I made a pact with myself. Every December, I returned to who I was. I put on the same kind of clothes I wore back then. I sleep where I can. I eat when I find kindness. I become the man I once was, not for show, not to test others, but to test myself. The silence stretched. I thought I was losing my grip on the truth, he added. But then, you. His voice trailed off, but I knew what he meant. You didn't look at me like I was broken. You looked at me like I mattered, not because I had something to offer, but because I existed. That's rarer than gold in this city. My throat tightened. I hadn't done anything remarkable. I'd just acted on instinct. But somehow, that night had left an imprint deeper than I realized. You didn't give charity, he said again, slowly. as if trying to make sure I heard it the way he meant it. You gave dignity. There's a difference. He stood then, walked to the mantel, and picked up a slim envelope. I watched as he opened it, pulled out a silver key card, and turned back toward me. "This is for you," he said. "I've already made the arrangements." I took it, hesitant. My name was engraved into the corner in clean, subtle lettering. "What is this?" I asked. "Access," he said, "to a position, a future. You'll come tomorrow. You'll meet the team. No handouts. You'll work. You'll learn. You'll lead. Eventually, you'll give someone else a reason to believe again." I looked down at the card, fingers trembling. I hadn't held something this valuable in my hand since ever. It wasn't just access to a building. It was access to a life I had only seen through glass. "Why me?" I asked. "Surely there were others." "Because you didn't ask for anything," he said. "And that's why you deserve everything. You reminded me what it looks like to act without agenda. You gave when you had nothing to spare. You cared when no one else stopped walking." He walked back to his chair, sat down, and took a deep breath. Not of exhaustion, but of closure. "Come tomorrow," he said. "First day of the rest of your life." I sat there, stunned, unable to speak. Everything in my world, my past, my expectations, my doubts, were suddenly unraveling like an old thread pulled loose. I left the building that night with the card in my coat pocket. The air was cold, but it didn't touch me. The streets still buzzed with horns and footsteps, but I couldn't hear them. I walked home like a man who had borrowed someone else's future, one I wasn't sure I deserved. I placed the key card on the kitchen counter like it was fragile. I stared at it for hours, sometimes pacing, sometimes just sitting with my head in my hands. I didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because something deeper had been stirred inside me. Not ambition, not greed, redefinition. I wasn't just being offered a job, I was being seen. I had spent my whole life surviving in the shadows. Now someone had handed me the light. The only question left was, what would I do with it? I walked into a skyscraper with nothing but a wrinkled suit, borrowed courage, and a whisper in my chest telling me this wasn't a mistake. But faith doesn't silence fear. Not when every glass wall reflects the version of you that doesn't belong. The Metropolis Bank headquarters rose out of the city like it had been dropped there by a god. Smooth stone, flawless glass, and steel lines so clean they looked like they'd been drawn by a surgeon. As I approached, the morning sun reflected off its surface so intensely that for a moment I had to look down, shielding my eyes. The building didn't just look expensive, it looked untouchable. The man in the revolving door ahead of me wore a navy trench coat with leather gloves, his briefcase clicking against his side. The woman behind me in line adjusted her diamond-studded watch. I had never felt so out of rhythm with the world around me. When I stepped through the main entrance, my shoes echoed against polished floors like gunshots. Everything inside was marble and metal, perfectly lit and hushed. People didn't talk here. They murmured. Laughter was minimal, if it existed at all. There were suits everywhere, ties, high heels, glossed fingernails, perfect posture. No one loitered. Everyone seemed to glide with purpose. I felt like a counterfeit bill. A good fake, maybe, but fake all the same. The security guard didn't even flinch when I handed over the key card Henry had given me. He scanned it, glanced at a screen, then gave a nod sharp enough to slice glass. Executive floor, elevator 5. That was it. No questions, no doubt in his voice. Somehow, the card had more credibility than I did. I stepped into the designated elevator and watched as the doors closed. Inside, the lighting was soft, and the mirrors so clean I could see the nervous sweat already forming on my neck. I looked like I was wearing ambition stitched from borrowed time. As the elevator climbed, floor by floor, I felt myself rising out of the version of me that once scavenged dollar store coffee and scraped together bus fare. But with every ding of a new level, I wasn't becoming someone else. I was becoming the version of me I had never been allowed to imagine. When the door slid open, I stepped into another world. The executive floor was silent, like it didn't need to prove its power with noise. Every hallway was wide, every surface gleaming. There were art pieces on the walls that could fund a small school. I stood still for a second, trying to act like I belonged, while every inch of me screamed to run. And then Henry Ashcroft turned the corner. He wasn't alone. 2 board members flanked him, both speaking quickly, folders in hand. But when he saw me, he stopped mid-stride, placed a hand on one of their shoulders, and gestured toward me. "This," he said with absolute calm, "is someone who sees what others don't." The men nodded politely, not entirely sure what that meant, but not daring to question Henry's tone. He dismissed them with a glance and walked toward me with the same effortless confidence he'd carried that first night in the ballroom. "You made it," he said. "Come." That was all. No small talk. No congratulations. Just 2 words and a motion for me to follow him down a long corridor lined with glass offices. The office he brought me to was small by executive standards, but to me, it might as well have been a throne room. Desk, laptop, full bookshelf, window that overlooked the entire city like a watchtower. I turned to him. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." He smiled faintly. "That's why you're here. You'll learn." He handed me a slim folder. "Your training schedule, meetings, briefings, strategy sessions, and you'll shadow me for most of it. Observe, absorb, speak only when you're ready." I nodded, trying to swallow the lump rising in my throat. I wasn't sure if it was anxiety or gratitude. Maybe both. The first meeting that day was with the bank's strategy team. Men and women with perfectly ironed suits and voices that carried power like thunder in a boardroom. They spoke in acronyms and jargon I didn't yet understand, about portfolios, risk assets, capital bridges. I took notes feverishly, filling page after page, not with knowledge, but with raw sound. Henry didn't speak often, but when he did, the room stilled. He didn't demand attention. He commanded it by using less of it. Every sentence he spoke was like a chisel, brief, accurate, undeniable. During lunch, I sat alone in the executive cafeteria. I didn't know where to sit, so I took the corner by the window. The view stretched over the heart of the city, where people moved like ants between bus stops and cabs. I looked down at the streets and thought about the man Henry had once been. Sleeping out there, walking, watching. Had he eaten in shelters and stared up at this very building, wondering what it looked like inside? And now here I was, sitting inside it. After lunch, I joined Henry again for a philanthropic planning session. It was a different side of the bank, a world of foundations, grants, community investments. It was also the first time I felt like I understood something. I saw a list of potential community partnerships on a slide. One name stopped my breath. Hope Spring Community Shelter. My old workplace, a tiny nonprofit, struggling, understaffed, and usually ignored. The file attached to their proposal had a list of staff names. Mine was one of them. My hand started to tremble. I closed the file quickly, hoping no one had noticed. After the meeting, I caught Henry in the hallway. "That shelter. Hope Spring. Did you—" He raised a brow. "Coincidence?" "Number. That's how this works. The people who give without being seen often need to be seen next. Consider this your first chance to give back in a new way." My mouth went dry. "They don't know I'm here." "They will," he said. "Eventually." I wanted to ask more. How he'd found the file. Why he'd kept tabs on me. But I realized none of that mattered. What mattered was that I was being trusted to help. Not just observe. Not just learn. But act. That night, as I walked out of the building, the lobby seemed warmer. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I walked slower. I stood straighter. I carried more than fear now. I carried the start of belief. I didn't go straight home. I walked the long way through the streets, the same streets where Henry had once walked in another skin. I watched the people who no one looked at. I passed a man asking for spare change and didn't look away. For the first time, I understood what Henry meant. But just when I began to believe I was ready for this world, a single name appeared on a report that made my past catch up to me. The same employer who once fired me for asking too many questions was about to sit across from me in a meeting I couldn't avoid. What do you do when the past you thought you'd buried reemerges, this time with your name on it? And what if exposing the truth could destroy the only future you've just begun to believe in? I arrived early, expecting another day of slow learning under Henry's mentorship. I had no idea that what waited for me in a confidential envelope on my desk would unravel the very foundation I was standing on. Inside the sealed black folder was a report from the Compliance and Ethics Department. Thick, stamped, and cold. I skimmed the pages casually at first, until I recognized a name that punched through the page like a bullet. My former boss at the small nonprofit where I once worked. His name appeared next to words like embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation. The evidence was detailed: hundreds of thousands in diverted funds, ghost vendor accounts, and manipulated grant reports. My hands went numb as I read deeper. Then, just as my stomach turned over, I saw my own name, listed as one of the junior audit reviewers for 2 quarterly reports from years ago. The same reports flagged in the investigation. I hadn't created them. I hadn't altered them. But I had signed off on them. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, everything, the view from the 32nd floor, the quiet confidence I'd been building under Henry's guidance, cracked. My name was in this mess. I was part of it, whether I meant to be or not. That nonprofit, Hope Spring, was the same place that once refused aid to my mother. The same office that looked into my mother's tearful eyes, heard her explain the heater had failed again in January, and told her the funds had already been allocated. Now I knew where those funds had gone, and that somewhere my unwitting signature had helped bury that truth. I stood there for what felt like hours. Every thought screamed, hide it, deny it, burn it. But I couldn't run. I had built too much on the idea that I would never turn my back on truth. Even when it was ugly, I walked the long hallway to Henry's office, the folder burning in my hands like shame. When I arrived, he looked up and said nothing, just studied my face as I placed the report in front of him. "You've seen it?" I asked, barely able to steady my voice. "I have," he replied. "Am I finished here?" He didn't respond right away. He flipped through the report calmly, as if it weren't potentially career-ending. "No," he finally said. "But the real test starts now." My heart thudded like thunder. "They'll think I'm involved." "Because you were on the file?" "Yes, even if I didn't know what was happening." He nodded, slowly, and his next words landed like a gavel. "Then, tell them everything. What if it costs me everything? Then at least you'll know who you are." Later that day, I was summoned to a meeting with the bank's internal PR and crisis management team. They were polite, surgical in tone, offering me what they called protective distance from the investigation. "You can quietly step back from the mentorship," one of them said. "Issue a statement that you're taking time to reflect, to allow the process to unfold." Another chimed in, "This doesn't have to ruin you. We just want to protect the brand." I looked around at their careful faces and felt something rise in my chest that wasn't anger, but conviction. "No," I said, "I won't step back. I'll step forward." That night, I wrote my statement by hand before it was typed and released by the media team. It was honest, painfully honest. I admitted my role in missing the signs. I acknowledged how my oversight had contributed to harm, even unintentionally. I vowed to work with investigators, to aid recovery efforts, and to use the platform I'd been given to advocate for tighter financial oversight across all outreach initiatives. The statement spread quickly. News outlets seized on the story. Whistleblower or scapegoat. Mentorship trainee caught in non-profit scandal. From Hope Spring to HQ, the cost of a signature. I braced for silence from Henry, but instead, he stood beside me in every public moment, at press briefings, in closed-door meetings, during Q&A panels where donors asked brutal questions. Every time I faltered, he reminded me, tell the truth. Own it. Let them see who you are. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. I wasn't running. I wasn't spinning. I wasn't denying. I was standing. Internal investigations confirmed I hadn't altered any documents. Independent auditors released statements verifying I had been unaware of the embezzlement. Legal teams assured the board I bore no intentional wrongdoing. But the most meaningful support came from an unexpected place, the staff of Hope Spring. A letter arrived, signed by 5 employees who had once been my peers. They wrote of my integrity, my long nights cross-checking budgets, my frustration when reports didn't add up. He questioned things no one else had the courage to, one wrote. If anyone could have stopped this earlier, it was him, but no one listened. Now, maybe someone will. The day I read that letter, something inside me shifted. Guilt didn't vanish, but grace stepped in. I began working directly with Henry and the compliance board on how to prevent similar breakdowns. We designed a new grant oversight model. We rolled out a transparency training series. My story, once a liability, became a lesson, and then a mission. I still walked to work, still kept the jacket from that cold night in my closet, still remembered the day my mother cried over a rejected heating request. But now, I carried the weight differently. I wasn't avoiding the past. I was finally answering it. Just as I found my footing again, Henry made me an offer that felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff. Not a punishment, a promotion, but it would demand more of me than I had ever been asked to give. You're the next leader, Henry said with calm certainty, if you're willing to bear the weight that comes with it. He wasn't just offering me a job. He was handing me a legacy that had been built on the edge of invisibility, empathy, and resolve. It was a rainy Monday morning when I received the call to meet Henry in the private conference room on the 41st floor, a space I had never been invited to before. I remember watching the rain streak against the glass like hesitant brushstrokes on a canvas that stretched above the city. Something in my chest felt unsettled, like a quiet storm gathering behind my ribs. Henry stood near the far window, hands folded behind his back, eyes on the skyline. He didn't turn as I entered. For a full minute, there was only silence between us, and I began to wonder if I had done something wrong. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, deliberate, and free of preamble. You've walked through fire, and never once asked to be rescued. You've earned something more than applause. I furrowed my brow, uncertain where he was leading. What are you saying? He turned to face me fully, and in his gaze I saw a rare mix of intensity and trust. I'm stepping back from the public side of our outreach division, and I want you to take over as Vice President of Social Impact. The room fell away from me in that instant. My knees felt weak. My throat tightened. Me, I whispered. I'm not ready for that. I'm still learning. I've only just... He interrupted gently but firmly. Exactly. You're still learning. That's why you'll lead differently. You're not polished. You're not rehearsed. You're real. That's rarer than you know. I protested again, trying to outline all the reasons I wasn't the right person. My background wasn't prestigious. My resume wasn't elite. My confidence wasn't bulletproof. He smiled faintly. You speak like someone who's still convinced leadership is about image. It's not. It's about holding the broken pieces of a system in your hands and daring to believe you can reshape them. I couldn't say no, not because I was ready, but because I knew what it meant to turn away from a chance to create change. I accepted, and the very next day, I found myself seated at the head of a table, surrounded by senior directors and policy analysts. staring at spreadsheets and forecasts that detailed the crumbling structure of our loan forgiveness program. It was designed to help, but it had become another bureaucratic maze. Families who applied waited months for replies, and those replies were often cold rejections. Applicants were filtered by rigid algorithms that didn't account for human reality. Job loss, family care, sudden illness, or emotional trauma. My first task was to fix it, but I didn't want to start with numbers. I wanted to start with people. I requested to travel personally to 3 cities where the program had the highest rejection. Rates I wanted to sit face-to-face with those who had been turned away, not just read their complaints in sanitized reports. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with dozens of individuals, some in small apartments, others in shelters, many in worn-down homes where the electricity flickered uncertainly in the background. Their stories shared common themes: unexpected tragedy, no safety net, endless paperwork, and silence from the system meant to help them. I remember one woman vividly, a single mother who had taken time off work to care for her father after a stroke. That gap in income led to a cascade of late payments, and the algorithm labeled her high risk. She was denied forgiveness because her credit score dipped too low, by 4 points, 4 points between help and hopelessness. Another man showed me a stack of unanswered appeal letters. I followed every instruction. I never missed a deadline. I still got nothing. I took notes in every meeting, not just data, but feelings, tone, language, the way voices broke when they talked about being treated like numbers, not people. When I returned to HQ, I didn't go straight to the boardroom. I went to the analytics department and sat with our engineers. I asked them to walk me through every line of code behind the forgiveness algorithm. What I discovered confirmed what I feared. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was just never designed to be human. I proposed a total restructuring: reduce automation, introduce a panel of trained human reviewers, integrate social context checks, and offer a 30-minute personal interview to every rejected applicant who appealed. I wanted empathy to be part of the equation. The board was skeptical. One executive said, "If we slow down the process, we'll lose efficiency." I answered with full calm, "If we don't slow down, we'll keep losing people." Henry backed my proposal without blinking. "We didn't build this bank to impress shareholders," he said in the meeting. "We built it to reshape futures." That's what she's doing. Within 6 weeks, the new model was in place. Approval rates climbed. More importantly, client satisfaction soared. Families wrote thank you letters not just for the financial help, but for being heard. One man told us, "It's the first time I felt like the bank saw me as more than a barcode." We began sharing success stories publicly, shifting the narrative from metrics to moments. The media picked it up. My name started appearing in headlines, sometimes with praise, sometimes with skepticism. I didn't care. I wasn't doing this to be liked. I was doing it because I knew what it meant to be ignored. For a brief while, it felt like everything was aligning. I had a team, a mission, a voice that was finally being used to lift others. And then, just as I began to settle into the rhythm of this new chapter, Henry vanished. No warning, no note, just an empty chair at the leadership table, and a silence that swallowed the halls. Once again, the man who had given me everything was gone, and this time he left the entire future in my hands. Silence from a man who could move entire markets with a single statement is never harmless. When Henry vanished without a word, the stillness didn't just feel strange, it felt dangerous. The first morning of his absence started like any other. Cold gray light slipping between the skyscrapers, the smell of coffee drifting through the corridors of Metropolis Bank's headquarters, and the hum of early conversations as executives prepared for another day of calculated progress. I had a folder in my hand, updates for Henry on the loan forgiveness program, fresh statistics, and letters from grateful families. I wanted him to see that the risk we had taken was paying off. But when I reached his office, the glass door was closed, and the chair behind his desk sat empty. At first I thought he might be in another meeting, perhaps one of those unlisted sessions with government officials or community leaders. I left the folder neatly centered on his desk and went to my own office, expecting to hear from him before lunch. Noon came and went. No message, no call, no sign of him in the building. By late afternoon, I asked his assistant if he was traveling. She gave me a look I didn't like, tight-lipped, with an edge of uncertainty. "I'm not sure where he is," she said carefully. "No schedule updates, no instructions. Just nothing." That evening, as the rest of the building emptied, I stood alone in the corridor outside his office, looking at the skyline beyond the glass. The city seemed to pulse in slow motion, lights flickering against the winter haze. It was hard to imagine Henry simply not being here. He was part of this place, woven into its rhythm like a heartbeat you don't notice until it stops. The second day brought murmurs, quiet, cautious conversations in the hallways. Two analysts whispered near the elevators about a rumored illness. Someone in the PR department muttered about a possible family emergency. No one knew anything for certain, and the absence felt heavier with every passing hour. By the third day, the silence had spilled into the press. A local business blog ran a headline: "Metropolis Bank CEO missing from public eye. Leadership in question." Within hours, larger outlets picked it up. Speculation spun out of control. Health problems, private scandal, secret negotiations with foreign investors. The air in the building turned tense, like everyone was waiting for bad news they couldn't name yet. That day, I was scheduled to give a presentation on our latest quarterly results. Normally, Henry would stand beside me, introducing me as the human heart of the bank's outreach programs. Now, I was alone on the stage, staring out at a room of skeptical investors and reporters, feeling the weight of their questions even before they asked them. Afterward, in the hallway, a board member stopped me. "If he doesn't come back soon," she said in a low voice, "you'd better be ready to answer for him." Her words weren't advice, they were warning. Investors began pulling out of small projects, citing uncertainty in leadership. Protesters, those who distrusted banks entirely, took advantage of the vacuum to stage demonstrations outside our doors. The chants echoed through the lobby like the sound of a clock running out of time. I worked longer hours, trying to keep the programs on track, meeting with department heads, calming staff who were afraid their jobs might disappear along with their leader. But every decision felt heavier without Henry's quiet nod in the background. By the end of the first week, the silence wasn't just in the building, it was inside me. I'd grown used to his presence, to the way he could anchor a room without speaking, to the sense that no matter how hard the storm raged, someone was at the wheel. Now I was the one holding the wheel, and the horizon ahead was obscured by fog. On the 10th day, a white envelope appeared under my office door. No postage, no return address. My name written in neat, deliberate handwriting that I recognized instantly. I tore it open, heart pounding. Inside, a single sentence: "Meet me where it started." My breath caught. I knew exactly what that meant. That corner, that winter night, the street lamp glowing faintly over cracked pavement. The moment when I gave my jacket to a shivering stranger who would later reveal himself to be the most powerful man in the city. I left the office early that evening, the winter air biting at my face as I walked toward that memory. The streets were quiet, coated in a thin layer of snow that crunched under my boots. Each step felt like moving backward in time. And then, under the same street lamp, I saw him. No chauffeured car, no security detail. Just Henry, standing in the falling snow, wearing a simple dark sweater, no jacket, his breath visible in the cold. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the snow drifting silently between us. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that held no apology, only acknowledgement "You've done well," he said, his voice carrying that familiar steadiness. "Better than I hoped." I stepped closer, my voice shaking. "You left without a word. The bank, everyone, has been testing itself," he finished for me, "and testing you." I didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. "I've been holding things together as best I can." He nodded. "And you've succeeded. Which is why it's time." "Time for what?" I asked, the snow clinging to my hair. He looked up at the street lamp, as if drawing strength from its steady glow. "I'm stepping down. Officially. Entirely." The words felt heavier than the snow, than the silence of the past 10 days. "You can't just—" "I can," he said quietly. "And I must. The city doesn't need me anymore. It needs you." My mind reeled. I thought of the programs, the people, the fragile trust we'd rebuilt. I thought of my own beginnings, small, cold, invisible. I thought of the night I gave away my jacket without expecting anything in return. "You want me to—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. "Carry the legacy," he said, "under your name, not mine." And in that moment, with the snow falling like silent applause around us, I realized he wasn't just handing me a role, he was handing me the weight of an entire city's hope. And I didn't know if my shoulders could bear it. I used to borrow change from strangers at bus stops, avoiding their eyes so I wouldn't have to explain my hunger. Now, I sat at the head of a table where millions shifted with my signature, and the city's future could tilt on a single choice I made. The day my appointment became official, the front page of every financial publication carried my name. Youngest executive to oversee citywide banking network in history. Beneath the bold letters, my photograph looked almost alien to me. Sharp suit, steady gaze. No sign of the boy who once shivered at a bus stop waiting for a bus he could barely afford. My office sat at the top of the tower, with glass walls that framed the city like a living painting. From up there, the streets looked neat and orderly, but I never let myself forget how cold and messy they felt at ground level. That's why, despite my new position, I still walked home most evenings, past vendors closing their stalls, past tired clerks locking up, past the corners where I used to linger in search of warmth. On my first day, the board sent me a list of all active policies, expecting I would simply approve them as they were. But I couldn't. Every single line of regulation was a living decision affecting real lives, and if it crossed my desk, it would cross my conscience. I began rewriting. I cut through outdated systems that punished those who were already struggling. I dismantled barriers that kept resources locked away from the people who needed them most. And every policy change came with one guiding question. If this had been me years ago, would it have helped me climb out or pushed me deeper in? Under my watch, we funded shelters that ran year-round, not just during winter crises. We opened warm zone hubs across the city, public spaces where anyone could step inside for heat, water, and a simple meal without paperwork or questions. I launched microloan programs aimed at small street-level entrepreneurs, vendors, artisans, mechanics, people often ignored by larger banks because their profit margins were too thin to matter on a balance sheet. But I remembered what it felt like to be invisible on someone else's ledger. One initiative was closest to my heart. The Winter Warmth Fund. Its seed money came from the bank itself, but donations poured in from across the city once the story was shared. The idea was simple. Every winter, we would distribute high-quality jackets, boots, and blankets to anyone who needed them. No means testing, no ID required. I didn't tell the press that it was inspired by the night I gave my own jacket away, but I knew. And Henry knew. Quietly, without public announcements, I also pushed through a debt forgiveness initiative for our own staff. Any employee earning under $50,000 a year would have their outstanding student loans paid off in full. I had seen too many talented, hard-working people chained to debts that drained their energy and ambition. The PR department wanted Me to make it a publicity stunt, press conferences, smiling photos, catchy slogans. I refused. If it's real, they'll feel it, I told them. And they did. I received handwritten letters from employees whose lives had been turned around, and some of those letters still sit folded in my desk drawer, creased from being reread. Slowly, the city's relationship with its banks began to change. Where once there was suspicion and resentment, there was cautious trust. People began walking through our doors not only for loans or accounts, but for advice, support, and sometimes just a warm cup of coffee. Walking through the city felt different now. The banners hanging from streetlights didn't just bear our logo. They carried messages about community events, job fairs, and neighborhood repair projects we sponsored. Conversations in cafes and on park benches included our programs in a tone I had never expected to hear about bank. Gratitude. Still, I never allowed myself to believe we were done. For every problem we solved, another waited in the shadows. The work was endless, but for the first time, it felt like it was worth the exhaustion. And then, one cold night as I walked home along the same route I had taken hundreds of times, I saw him, a boy of maybe 12, standing alone near a flickering streetlight. He wore thin sneakers, jeans too short for his legs, and no jacket. His arms were wrapped around himself, and his breath came in small, shaky clouds. For a second, I froze. The image was so familiar it was like looking at an echo from my own past. I stepped toward him, the wind cutting sharp against my face, and realized the cycle had just brought me full circle. The question now wasn't whether I could help him. It was whether I could change the kind of world that had left him standing there in the first place. I became the man I once helped. Years ago, I had stood on a frozen street corner and given my jacket to a stranger shivering in the dark. Now, on a night just as bitter, I was the one holding the power to change someone's story with a single choice. The evening air carried the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones, the kind that even the thickest coat can't fully shield you from. The streets were quieter than usual, muffled under a thin layer of fresh snow. I had just left a late meeting, my breath forming pale clouds in the streetlight glow, when I noticed him. A teenage boy, maybe 12 or 13, sat on the low ledge outside a closed convenience store. His sneakers were worn, the fabric split near the toes, letting the cold seep in. His jeans were too short, leaving his ankles exposed to the icy wind. His thin hoodie clung to him like a paper shield. His arms were wrapped tightly around his chest, and his head was bowed, as if trying to disappear into himself. People passed by, heads down, collars up, slipping past him as though he was part of the pavement. I knew that look. I knew that invisibility, my steps. Slowed, then stopped altogether. Memories surged, uninvited and unrelenting. The night I first met Henry. The helpless chill in my own bones. The disbelief when a stranger offered me something I didn't even know how to ask for. Without thinking, I stepped toward him. "Hey," I said gently, so as not to startle him. His head lifted slowly. His eyes met mine, wide, guarded, and full of a quiet desperation that hit me like a punch. I saw myself in those eyes, not just my reflection, but the version of me that had once believed nobody saw him. I shrugged out of my coat. It was heavy, lined, expensive, the kind of coat I had once only seen in shop windows. I held it out to him. "You'll need this more than I do tonight." For a moment he just stared at it, as if unsure it was real. His fingers twitched, hesitating to take something so freely given. "Go on," I encouraged. "It's yours." Slowly he reached out, his small cold hands brushing mine as he took the coat. I could feel how chilled his skin was, as if he'd been sitting there for hours. He slipped his arms into the sleeves, and the coat swallowed him whole. It was too big, but it was warm. That was enough. His lips parted, and in a shaky voice he whispered, "You don't know what this means." My chest tightened. I crouched down so I was at his level, the snow crunching softly under my shoes. I smiled, though my throat ached with the weight of memory. Neither did I told him. We held each other's gaze for a moment, and I knew he didn't fully understand what I meant. Not yet. But someday, he might. Someday, he might look back and realize that this moment, small as it seemed, was the start of something larger. I didn't ask him where he was from or why he was out there alone. Sometimes survival is about the moment at hand, not the story behind it. I stood, gave him a nod, and turned to leave. The cold wrapped around me instantly, sharp and unkind, but it couldn't touch the warmth that had settled in my chest. As I walked away, I thought about how my life had been built from moments exactly like this, acts of kindness that seemed insignificant at the time, but carried the weight, entire future in them. I had led a bank, reshaped policies, moved millions in funding, and built programs to help thousands. But in that instant, I was reminded that real change often begins quietly, without press releases or headlines. It begins one person at a time, in the kind of moments most people hurry past. Behind me, the boy adjusted the coat, pulling the collar up against his neck. I didn't look back again, but I could picture him sitting a little straighter, the way warmth has a way of giving someone back a piece of their dignity. My hands were cold, my ears stung from the wind, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had done something extraordinary, but because I had done something simple, and simplicity is where the heart of humanity lives. The future isn't built in boardrooms or on balance sheets. It's built in quiet moments, one human act at a time. And on that freezing night, walking away coatless but warm where it counted, I knew my next chapter had already begun, without a jacket and without a single regret. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Join our journey by hitting subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Share this video with someone who believes kindness can change lives, because every view spreads the warmth further. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your own moment of unexpected kindness, and let's inspire each other. And remember, the smallest act can start the biggest change. Yours could be next. On a freezing night, I gave my jacket to a shivering old man, never knowing he was the CEO controlling the city's banks. That single act of kindness set off a chain of events that would change my life forever, from the streets to the skyscrapers. This is a true journey of empathy, power, and the moments that define who we become. Watch till the end. You won't believe how the story comes full circle. If this story moved you, don't just stop here. Hit subscribe and be part of this journey of hidden truths and unexpected kindness. Drop a comment with a moment of compassion you'll never forget. I'll be reading them all. Share this video with someone who still believes small acts can change big lives. And remember, sometimes the jacket you give away might be the key that rewrites your destiny.